Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about static site generators. Does anyone use a static site generator already? A few. Hopefully I have some interesting things to say for people who are already using them and some interesting things to say for people who don't. When I submitted my talk proposal, I didn't realize it was such a strict 10-minute time slot. So we've got static site generators, PHP, and the Cuban revolution. I'm going to have to cut out the Cuban revolution, I'm sorry. Just haven't got time for it. I'll stand to the side so you can see the screen. What is a static site generator? A static site generator basically is a script or application that you run separate from your website. It takes your content, it takes some templates, it merges it together, and it generates a set of HTML files which you can then deploy. Typically with the current crop of static site generators, they take their content from markdown files, but it doesn't have to be that way, but that just tends to be overwhelmingly the trend at the moment. They use a templating library, something like Twig or Handlebars, or they generally use an off-the-shelf component for that. And the output requires nothing from the web server. It's just HTML files. So it doesn't have to be executed, doesn't have to be interpreted, which makes it very, very easy to host. So what are static sites good for? I asked Twitter what a static site is good for, Twitter being Twitter. Thank you, James Tickham, very helpful. Any site that doesn't need dynamic content. It got a little bit more useful from there. Steve Kirtley said that he's a fan of static site generators where the site content changes very rarely. So he's talking about content changes that happen maybe every 3 months or every year. So instead of rebuilding that page for every request as you would with a normal dynamic site, or every 10 minutes or every hour if you have caching in there, he's talking about rebuilding that page once every 6 months, say. So good for brochureware type sites. Nev Stokes had a really good bit of feedback. He says as the security aspect of using just static files is a really big plus for him. The fact that there's no server-side scripting means that the attack surface just sort of drops through the floor. Tom Hazeldine said they're really handy when you want the hosting setup to be as minimal as possible. So maybe hosting on GitHub pages or hosting entire site on an Amazon S3 bucket. Sally Late talked about a project that she used a static site generator for recently, and she was thinking about the longevity of the output, the fact that just generating static HTML files, CSS, JavaScript, those files can live on forever. They're not going to stop working, which was really important for her project. So there's loads of advantages. You've got minimal and inexpensive hosting requirements. We're not introducing additional attack surfaces beyond what your web server already has. They can be really fast because there's low user wait times, which means that the user experience can be improved. And they can be really simple and therefore last a long time without any intervention, without any maintenance. They're just going to keep running theoretically forever. But this is not 1997. This is 2018, and people have business requirements with websites, and they have reasonable expectations of as users, and there are things they might actually want to do on a site. It's not entirely unreasonable to expect a website maybe to have a contact form, or to enable a user to be able to search the content, things that aren't traditionally going to be available in a completely static set of HTML files. And I don't think it's particularly unreasonable a request to have a contact form on a site if that's what the business is asking for. So what do we do about this? What can we do about this conflict between wanting to have completely static pages with all the advantages they bring and to have some functionality and make them useful? We have this concept called serverless, which basically just means somebody else's server. So you have a set of static pages, you have functionality that exists somewhere else via an API, and you use JavaScript on your static page to interact with that. So they call it serverless because that's what the long beard of the internet has decided. There's also this sort of technology stack that's called the Jam stack. Has anyone heard of the Jam stack? This is a popular way of implementing this. Jam stands for JavaScript, APIs, and a misplaced sense of nostalgia. So this is the basic serverless concept. You've got your site, and then you stick some, this is static HTML, you stick some JavaScript on it, and you can then use that to interact with a database, with a Lego brick, with an ancient Roman scroll, or maybe send an email. And all that happens in the cloud, which, as we know, is just somebody else's computer. If you've been building websites for a long time, you might recognize this diagram, you might recognize this model. Basically, in the 1990s, that's what we used to call a CGI bin. So that's basically the same model. The long beard of the internet fails to remember the time when this was just a CGI bin, and they think that going back into this model will somehow solve our problems rather than be the origin of them. So serverless actually isn't that dramatic a concept. We're already doing things which are pretty much serverless on a lot of sites. If you use Google Analytics, you know, that's just JavaScript you're dumping into a page. It's interacting with a web API and providing a service to you that you don't have to implement on the server side. But if you use like a MailChimp sign-up form or something, you know, this is the same sort of concept. You're not implementing the functionality on your server, you're just pinging out to somebody else. Facebook likes and shares, Stripe.js for payments and things. This is all that sort of thing. So basically, serverless architecture, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a different thing. It's dancing to the melody instead of the beat. So we talked about these advantages of static sites that we looked at just a moment ago. So if we're looking at then stuffing our sites full of JavaScript and APIs to get on this whole Jamstack thing, how does that affect the advantages that we looked at? Well, where we had minimal and inexpensive hosting requirements, we now have proprietary platforms and third-party APIs with associated costs, perhaps, to get all this functionality working. Where we had no additional attack surfaces, we've now got potentially multiple attack surfaces because we're picking different APIs that are under somebody else's control, and we're introducing maybe third-party JavaScript into our pages. Where we had very quick, snappy, plain HTML pages, we now stuffed them full of JavaScript, and we all know how that goes. Where we had very simple, long-lasting technology, we now have very brittle technology that's relying on multiple potential points of failure, pinging out lots of different APIs. There go your advantages. Bad luck. Basically, it just pays to know what you're getting into. There are no bad choices for different types of technology, only the appropriate choice for the problem you're trying to solve. So just be aware of what problem you're trying to solve is. Static sites, genuine proper static sites, are great. They solve a real problem, and all those advantages that we saw are genuine advantages. But be conscious of whether you actually need a genuinely static site or whether you're going to want to start layering in functionality. And if you're going to start layering in functionality, is there a better solution? Maybe you should look at, you know, something server-side. So keep weighing the pros and cons, especially as business requirements change. So how can we do this in the PHP? There's a project called Sculpin, which is probably the best established, most well-known static site generator. It seems to be Symfony-based, uses Twig for its templating. You can just install it with Composer. It seems to have a really nice way of extending it. It's got event hooks, and it seems to extend things in quite a Symfony-like way, as far as I can tell, although that's not really my area of expertise. But that seems like a good one. There's one called Jigsaw, which is Laravel-based. So if you're into Laravel, if you're already using Blade and things for your templates, then that would be ideal. Again, you just install it with Composer and off you go. There's a really nice one called Couscous, which is aimed at documentation. So if you're doing like just a documentation site, maybe you're documenting an API for somebody to use for their Jamstack website. You can use Couscous to do that. Again, Twig templates. So, in conclusion, static sites are good. Serverless is CGI bin for hipsters. Static site generators for PHP are in fact a thing. I've been Drew, and thank you very much.